Well, the consensus around hospital food is that it stinks. Our next guest hopes to change all that. She overhauled Scarborough Hospital's menu to include healthier, fresher, and more nutritious dishes. And she's here now to tell us how better food in hospitals could lead to a better healthcare system. Joshna Maharaj is Ryerson's Assistant Director of Food Services and Executive Chef at Ryerson University. Hello and welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Okay, so you're the Executive Chef at Ryerson.
Yes.
Where did this all start for you in terms of doing hospital food reform?
It was a very lovely story, and a lot of it kind of landed in my lap. But right out of cooking school, I was always so much more interested in how people were eating outside of restaurants. I knew that I never wanted to be a restaurant chef. I was much more interested in community-based work, right? Community food security is what we call it. So I've worked in nonprofits at a very grassroots level, trying to figure out why not everybody has really good quality food on the table. So when the folks at Scarborough Hospital were interested in making some change, they reached out to the food community, and beautifully this request landed in my lap, and I jumped at the chance because that's an amazing opportunity to make some real change and positively impact people's lives in so many ways.
Okay. You know, most of us have been into a hospital,
Yes.
either been admitted or
Yes.
visited someone there. So you've either eaten in the cafeteria, you've been lucky enough to have the food that they serve at your bedside. How would you characterize or describe the quality of hospital food in this province?
Highly processed and as cheap as possible, right?
Easy.
100%, yes. Unfortunately, that is the case, right? Because the budgets have been continuously slashed, say, over the course of the last 25 years or so. And there is some notion that there is still fat to trim, when what the message that I feel like I want to scream about is that we are scraping bone. Right? There is no fat to trim. We have gone down to the barest skeleton of a staff or of funding to support purchasing really good quality ingredients. And it really, there's a huge opportunity.
You suggest that it hasn't always been this way. I think, like, when we talk about sort of colloquially hospital food, sort of like the jokes made about airline food, that even though maybe airline food has improved over the years, we still think of that sort of 1970s really yucky stuff.
Yes.
Hospital food used to be good?
It did. Listen, when I got to Scarborough, and that was 2011, the staff who were there remember the days where there were 5 cooks who just prepared vegetables. Imagine. And that fresh rolls were baked every day. And in the walk-in fridges, you can see the hooks where whole sides of an animal would come in and be butchered, right? So there was a moment where there were a lot of people working in that kitchen cooking beautiful food from scratch. And I think this is the really important message, is that what I'm saying and what a lot of people are saying about the need for change is not about crazy granola hippie ideas. Right? It's a reminder about the fact that we once knew how to do this.
Okay, so what happened? Like, what changed?
Budgets. We decided, right? At some point, we decided that paying a human being to stand at a counter and chop food and cook food from scratch was simply too expensive. And so the budgets got narrower and narrower and narrower, and hospital administrators had to make the choice to move to a retherm system, which really takes the human element out of the process. Or if they wanted to keep humans involved, they had to agree to a bare bones labor structure and using highly processed ingredients to do more sort of assembling food than actually any cooking.
Just lay it out for me.
Yeah.
Typically, like, what am I getting if I'm admitted into hospital? I get my evening meal.
Yes.
What am I getting?
You're going to get a little, like, 4-ounce piece of meat that might have already been cooked when it showed up in the hospital, right? And just so thawed or warmed up, with a little, like, ice cream scoop of mashed potatoes, some boiled peas or carrots. Maybe there's a bit of gravy or sauce, but it likely won't have very much salt or flavor involved. You'll probably get some Jell-O or applesauce, a lukewarm cup of tea, and maybe a little pudding or something like that, right? But it will be very mathematical, very measured, very counted. The salt grams, the sugar, the fat will all be very calculated. But
calculated because for my health?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, and for what that understanding of what you should have based on why you're there, right? Also, there are almost 74-ish therapeutic diets that the food has to be adapted for to make sure it's appropriate for the body and whatever procedure they've just had or are about to have. So that's it. But really, it's not a joyful experience.
Okay. I'm getting the same food at the cafeteria, right?
Not always,
Okay.
not always. Because there's an opportunity, because people pay in the cafeteria, there's an opportunity because the budget for patients is woefully low in this province, right? It's embarrassingly low what we spend to feed a patient, and the margins are a little bit more sensible in a retail cafeteria space.
On average,
Yeah.
what does a patient meal cost?
Well, we get, meaning the province sends hospitals or pays $7.33
Per meal.
a day for 3 meals a day and a snack.
To feed me, I'm a patient in the hospital.
Yes.
To feed me 3 meals a day, the budget's $7.33
For food
So about
ingredients.
$2 and change per meal.
Yeah.
Okay, and
Right, there you go.
what is the average? I was
Yes.
just trying to imagine what
Yeah.
you could get outside of a hospital on that budget. What is the average length of stay for a patient in an
4 to
Ontario
6
hospital?
days.
4 to 6
4 to
days.
6 days, right? And the cost of a bed is about $1,500, right? So the thing that I keep saying is, give me $10 a day. Give me an extra $2.66 to potentially save the $1,500 a day that we spend on that bed, right? That's sort of the holy grail in this effort, is the shortened patient stay, right? If we find a way to prove that feeding a patient better will accelerate healing, right, and get them out of there sooner. But we're a long ways away because I need somebody to take the risk on that experiment.
Okay, we're going to talk about that
Yeah.
connection about feeding people more healthy food may shorten the stay in a moment. But I want to ask you this: so you get your meal. I don't know. Do most people eat it? How much food gets rejected out of these hospitals?
Just under half.
Under
of the
half.
food that goes on the tray in many hospitals just takes the long road back to the garbage can, right? And there's lots of reasons why patients aren't eating, right? For sure, because the food is not that great, but also they're not feeling, their appetite's not so good, post-anesthetic, you don't know what their situation is. So there are lots of reasons. Hilariously, some of the reasons are silly, like patients couldn't open the packages. Right? A lot of times food comes into hospitals pre-made and they juice the packages up with more oxygen or gases to keep them, to preserve them, but that puts a really intense seal on the packages. And patients who are not that strong can't always open the package. So if you imagine that, a hilariously ridiculous barrier to actually getting the food in your mouth. But generally speaking, just less than half of that food ends up getting wasted.
Can you explain, you use thermalization, this process? Can
Yes.
you
So they
explain
call
to us,
it
what system it is to get food?
rethermalization. So essentially what happens is the food shows up in cardboard boxes, already cooked, portioned, and frozen, right? So staff work in fridges, like they have parkas on, right? They work in fridges and they assemble plates. The idea is half of the plate is hot and half the plate is cold, and there's this little lip. So these plates, these trays, the salad and the milk on this side and the hot stuff on this side, it goes in this box and it heats up to the 175 degrees on one side and the 4 degrees on the other side. And they plug them in docking stations sort of in the respective wards in the hospital. Everything comes up to temperature and then patients are served those trays. But the perennial complaint is about limp salad greens and warm milk, right? Because that seal is not all that it could be. And there are certain limitations to what can be made in this hot box system. There are some hospitals that are really getting innovative about using it as a braiser, right? As a great opportunity for stews and things like that that can sit under even heat for a while. But there's a limit, right, to how far you can go.
And given, I mean, it's not just about limp salad and warm
Yeah.
or whatever. I mean, what safety and quality standards? This is a hospital. People are
They're
ill. They're there to be
well,
healed. Yeah.
yes.
So where are these standards with quality?
They're very high, right? And they're very well adhered to, absolutely. In fact, that has been a really interesting process in my effort to bring more farm fresh produce into the hospital, right? Outside of the hospital context, we love when leaves have holes in them because it shows that if it's good enough for the bugs, it's good enough for us, and it's likely an organic product, right? And very often, organic produce has critters and all sorts of things. But in the context of a hospital, that becomes a much greater challenge, right? And it's interesting sort of hazard kind of discussions that I had to have because I'm thrilled at the idea that worms and spiders and all these sorts of things are coming in on the produce. But the infection control people are freaking out, right? Because I've just opened up a huge liability. So what I've discovered in my work is that it all depends who you're talking to, right? And what level of vision or commitment or buy-in that person has to the bigger project of what you're trying to do.
Well, let's talk about that. How much attention do hospital administrators, let's start with this, pay to the quality of food?
I am sure that they pay a solid, a reasonable amount of attention to it, in the sense that it's adequate. You know, this is what I hear a lot from the dietitians and the administrators. The food is adequate. But in my opinion, right, there's two important things at play. One is we should shoot higher, right? We should aim higher. And you see in pamphlets, you know, for hospitals there, they boast about amazing new vistas on innovation and research, and how we won't stop until we've really figured out how to do something beautifully. Why they haven't applied that philosophy to food services is beyond me, right?
You ask these questions.
I do.
Yeah, what do you hear?
I mostly get people saying, that's a really good question, right? People saying, we've never thought about it like that, but you're right. Right? Because generally in a hospital, food services is sort of an irritating necessity, right? And it's even housed with maintenance and housekeeping, right? Whereas it should have much higher priority, on par with patient care, considering all the sort of inputs into a patient and all of the tools and resources available to help somebody heal and get better, right? The other interesting thing that we need to recognize is the fact that patient satisfaction scores aren't all that bad.
I was going to ask you that.
Right?
Yeah.
That is the important thing. They hover around average. And administrators are generally quite happy with that, right? They're happy with, it's not terrible, right? I think that part of the issue is the fact that they give that thing to somebody right when they're being discharged, right? And you will say whatever you're going to say to get out of there, right? I think they should give it to them on day 3. Right, when they've eaten enough meals and they're just hanging out in their room waiting, right, for a meal to show up. Because people need to be angrier, right? People ask me a lot, how can they make this change happen? What can they do in their neighborhoods? And I say, be angrier.
Well, let me ask you about this, Joshna, because maybe as patients, if the average stay, I think you said, was 4 to 6 days.
Yes.
They're like, okay, I'm here for like a medical reason. That obviously is the #1 priority. If I had to put up with some adequate food,
yeah,
so be it.
Right. Here's what I say to that, and that is we have grown up in Ontario, in Canada, boasting about our amazing public healthcare system. And as a kid, you get so much advice from medical professionals throughout your life about how to eat and what healthy eating is. So why is there such a disconnect when you are actually in their care, right? When you find yourself in their care in a hospital, it's not the same food, right? And all the things they've recommended to you do not translate to that plate. And that disconnect is something that we as citizens, you know, as sort of the population who is being served by this system, should be much louder and angrier about.
We also know that this province has great diversity, regional diversity, ethnic diversity.
Yes.
To what extent do hospitals sort of meet those expectations or needs, arguably?
Yeah, it's a very important point. And when I was working in Scarborough specifically, it's a very specific community of folks there. And interesting things happen, right? I went to visit some patients, and I remember there was one patient. He was an older South Asian gentleman. I think he had recently had a stroke, and his adult daughter was there holding a tuna salad sandwich up to him to bite, you know, to eat. And out of curiosity, I said to him, "Sir, have you ever eaten a tuna salad sandwich before in your life?" He said, "No." Right? And he said, "Also, applesauce is not a food in my culture." Right? And I smiled, right? And I said quietly, I said to him, "What would you say if I could bring you a plate of dal and rice right now?" And he was like, "Can you? Can you?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I can't. But I would love to." And so acknowledging that became a really hot priority for us. And so because we were in Scarborough, we made sure to revamp the menu to put familiar, comforting foods on the menus for the population that we were serving. So congee is on the menu, dal and rice was on the menu, jerk chicken and rice also got onto the menu. We had lots of beautiful beef curries and stews, right? Because there's a large Muslim population there as well. And we started using halal meat. and offering halal meat. We made connections with a local mosque, and an imam came in to give us advice on, you know, how to structure the kitchen and the service, different colored handles for serving, and just figuring out what to sort of keep sequestered away from the rest of the population. And it worked beautifully. Right? It worked beautifully. You have to think about who you're feeding, and we have to think about the food as so much more than just filling the tank. No?
Okay, prior to this experiment at Scarborough Hospital, if I wanted dal and rice, I could have my family bring it in to me to eat, or halal meat or whatever.
Yes.
Now it's on the menu, and you just said that it works beautifully.
Yes.
What does beautifully mean?
That means people respond really well to it, right? They the light turns on because there's a suggestion that there's somebody downstairs who is thinking about you, thinking about who you are and what you could do. I do believe that the slashing of the budgets and the mechanizing of this system has really lost the human connection. Right? And beyond better quality food, I think that connection is a very, very sad thing to lose, right? Particularly around food. From the people who grew the food, to the people who cooked it for you, to the people who brought you that tray.
Let's back up for a moment. Because you said, you know, you've talked to various hospital administrators. They seem, in your words, you know, okay, with as long as it's good enough, it's good.
Yes.
How did this all start with Scarborough Hospital? When you went and said, hey, I've got an idea.
It wasn't even they prompted it, right? God bless them, right? Anne-Marie Males was the vice president, one of the VPs there at the time. And she started seeing at meal times, you know, relays and relays of family members with packets and packages of food that they were bringing in, right? And she realized the terrible inefficiency of this entire situation, right? The fact that it's sort of a bit of a charade, the feeding, because the tray comes, the patient refuses it, their family members come in. Downloading the responsibility onto the families is also quite questionable. And so she was convinced that there was a better way to do this. And so she reached out to the food community in Toronto, and that's how the message got to me. But they had the fire inside of them, which was, for me, a dream come true, because I work a lot to build that fire inside of people and then push for change, right?
And so when they came to you, where did you start? Like when you said, okay, let's look at what they're, I mean, where did this process, what were you thinking about when you were like, because you can't do it all overnight, so where were you starting from? What was the intention?
The first thing was to observe the operation, to see exactly what happened and how that food moved from when it came in on the loading dock to when it went up on a tray, right? To figure out where the opportunities are to intercept.
From farm to table.
Yeah, right, quite literally, right? And then seeing where the pockets of labor existed, right? Because this is the tricky thing. If I now want to move to a scratch cooking model, that means more labor. But I have no budget to increase, to do any hiring or anything. I have to make this revolution happen within the budget parameters that existed. So what we started doing, great example was toast, right? Toast it can never work because it will never survive the trip under that sweaty dome. Right?
That's that light dome, you mean?
Right, exactly. And everything has to get covered by that dome for infection control purposes, right? It has to be covered before it goes to the patient. And so I said, let's just forget it. Let's take the toast off completely, and let's put a frittata on the menu. Because a frittata, you pull it out when it's slightly under, and by the time it sits in the heat and gets up there, it's perfectly cooked. And that's something we can serve well, right? But what was interesting was that the labor to toast the bread had to be comparable to the labor required to crack the eggs. Right? And so I literally went in one afternoon and cracked the 210 eggs myself and timed it, right? From when I pulled the case out till when I finished wiping up the counter. We figured out that was 90 minutes.
To make 210 eggs
to prep those frittatas. Yep. And so we figured out that was, and so we could displace the 90 minutes that we are not spending toasting bread. We could repurpose it, right? But unfortunately, almost every change had to go through this, right? Which, God bless the team over there who were dedicated enough to constantly tinkering and figuring this out. But it is a slow and uphill battle.
So you still have to make these meals on the $7.33 per day budget?
Yes.
All right. Frittatas don't cost more than bread to make them?
We figured out a way to make it work. Slightly smaller portion, right? That was the way, because a lot of whole ingredients end up being more expensive than highly processed ingredients. And so a slightly smaller portion of a really beautiful thing turned out well.
Okay, and what's the evidence that this is working in terms of, you said 50% at most hospitals of food is being rejected and ending up in the garbage and the waste?
Yes.
What happened with the Scarborough situation?
So, although the evidence is purely anecdotal, we haven't done proper waste audit to actually see what's happening and how people are responding. A few times I would deliver food myself, right? Mostly for my own joy to see someone's nice, excited face. But there was a ripple effect of excitement when they knew that fresh, good food was coming, right? And people were in a bit of disbelief. And even my friends at Sick Kids, when we would try to put different things on the menu or seasonal things, right? And make explicit farm connections to the experience of the patient, everybody lit up, right? Even I remember this one day, we had a market table, and I loved seeing moms wheeling their kids down to a farmer's market or somebody in scrubs standing at a market stall. Like, that connection was so important. But I had a little bag of carrots, and they're little ugly, beautiful little things, right? And it was just, please, just have one and put it in your mouth. But the number of people who were worried about taking that carrot and eating it, who didn't know that it's like a little bit of dirt on the skin is not going to harm. It's not that dirt. You know what I mean? It's not dirty in a way that's toxic. It's just dirt. That's actually
just real.
Yeah, thank you. That's exactly it. And make things with texture and crunch and life and flavor have always gone over beautifully well. And this is the kind of thing people are repeatedly asking for, right? When I would look at feedback forms, that we would send them up to see how people are enjoying this, whether they felt the portion was generous enough, was the flavor good, what was the temperature, and people always reported that they loved eating food that obviously came from recognizable whole ingredients, right?
So that's anecdotal evidence you have on
is.
that one. Is there evidence, anecdotal, I suppose, probably at this stage, between people eating more healthy, more fresh, more nutritious food in the hospital and better health outcomes?
There isn't. There isn't. And part of me thinks it's so curious because there's a common sense element to this. Everybody knows hospital food is sort of famously ridiculed, and we all know that sick people should get better quality food. Unfortunately, there exists no real academic proof about any of this, and policymakers are sort of paralyzed without things like that. So there's part of me that thinks that what I really need to do is go back to school, right? Get a master's and a PhD in this so I can populate this body of work so we can really push this change forward. But we're really looking for somebody who's ready to take a bit of a risk on this.
And are there plans to expand this beyond Scarborough Hospital?
Yes. In fact, in the last 4 years, there's been a groundswell of excitement and activity around this. And almost every hospital now, I'm sure, has had this discussion about what can we do about our food, what options do we have. My friends at UHN have made some really...
University Health Network, here in
have
Toronto,
made some amazing strides in rethinking how they're sourcing their food. Understanding, too, that they can leverage buying power, right? And that we can kind of push the market a little bit on this in terms of our demand for more wholesome, more locally sourced food, or even prepared food using locally sourced ingredients, right? With our dollars and our purchasing power.
Within the same budget.
Yes, we can, right? We absolutely can. There is room there. I hesitate to go too far down that road because I really do think we need to invest in feeding people in hospitals better, right? The notion that real food would cost the same as highly processed food is a bit ridiculous, right? And we have to think about, too, the livelihood of the farmers and the people who have grown this food because they're the ones who are often shortchanged in this transaction.
We just have to go here, but I mean, is it Ontario? This doesn't seem exclusive to Ontario. When you think of hospital food, you hear these complaints in Connecticut and Saskatchewan, wherever you go. So it seems to me that this is an almost cultural challenge that we're dealing with, that we in North America have just decided that when you go to the hospital, you get crummy food.
Yep. And it's not just North America, right? Europe tells a very similar story. The UK, those folks have made some amazing strides. They are leading the way in rethinking what publicly funded hospital food could be like. Of course, our friends in the US, their private hospitals have the most dreamy situation, right? Stanford Hospital is the most beautiful scenario you can imagine.
In terms of food.
In terms of food, right? There's a vase and a flower bud on the tray for a patient, which is wonderful. But our friends across the pond in the UK have really reworked priorities, right, to push for wholesome, locally sourced, well-raised food in hospitals.
What are the spin-offs, spin-off benefits of creating better food, or food from scratch, at least, in hospitals?
There's a number of them. There's an economic model where we talk about institutions using their buying power to nurture local small businesses and an agricultural economy, right? That's flat out, easily. I am convinced that we can start pairing up hospitals and farms, and that a hospital food budget can actually nurture a farm for a season. And there's a beautiful relationship that can happen there. On the other side of things, I think there is a tremendous opportunity for a hospital to reposition itself as a bit of a food nucleus in a community, right? Gift shops could have recipe books and tools and whole ingredients, right? If we get to a point where a diabetic gets a cooking class, a newly diagnosed diabetic gets a cooking class before they get discharged, and we send them off with recipes and good oils and, you know what I mean, and the right salt and an understanding of how to feed themselves, people could stop into a hospital and pick up food ingredients or, you know, frozen things of soup or anything like that. We could have chef community could come in and do guest cooking lessons, or, you know, or animate the space in a really beautiful way. Like, people spend a lot of time waiting around in hospitals, right? Why not capture that audience, right? And share some better information about good food. I think it could be a beautiful revolution.
This is an interesting idea. Thank you for coming in and talking to us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.